A bombshell new lawsuit that involves Sean Diddy Combs, but isn't against the disgraced music mogul. As Diddy is listening to closing arguments in his sex trafficking and racketeering trial in federal court in New York, his son, Justin, has been hit with a lawsuit by a woman who claims that he lured her to Los Angeles to be raped by multiple men, including his dad, Sean Diddy Combs.
There are stories that hit hard, and then there are stories that hit different. Because the moment a situation shifts from public drama into something that feels personal, something that feels like it's coming from inside, that's when everything changes. Instantly.
This new lawsuit involving the son of Sean Diddy Combs. It was just in the hours after the government on Thursday finished their closing arguments in the case against the disgraced music mogul that we learned about this new lawsuit against Sean Combs' son, Justin. Justin is one of Diddy's 7 kids. Here he is with his dad's arm around his shoulder. Justin has been in court supporting his dad just as his siblings have been over the past 7 weeks of testimony. Now, listen, whatever your feelings are on Sean Combs and whether you think he's guilty of the charges that could put him in federal prison for the rest of his life, you just have to think how difficult it must be to hear about all the sexual exploits of their father. But if you believe the allegations I'm about to tell you in this new lawsuit brought against Justin Combs, Justin apparently was very aware of his dad's lifestyle. The new lawsuit that just dropped was filed by a woman from Louisiana who says in 2017, Justin Combs coaxed her to come to LA because she says that Diddy's son promised her a job in the entertainment industry. She claims the two had met on Snapchat, and Justin allegedly asked for explicit pictures, and she sent them. The woman, who's not named in this suit, says when she got to LA, she was raped by several men, including a certain music mogul now at the center of this high-profile, historic trial in federal court in Lower Manhattan. Yes, Sean Diddy Combs. The alleged victim claims that Justin invited her out west for a weekend to talk about her career. But when she got there, she says she was kept in a house in Beverly Hills. And according to the lawsuit, things seemed fine at first, but when she allegedly asked Justin Combs if they were going to leave the house, he said no. She claims that Justin Combs offered her alcohol, pills, and weed, and she thinks that the weed was laced. Now, you can see in those allegations some of the comparisons in this lawsuit to the so-called freak-offs that we have been hearing about for weeks at the center of the Sean Diddy Combs sex trafficking and racketeering trial. The woman says after she took the drugs, 3 men entered the house and all of them were wearing masks. Now, it's unclear what kind of masks the men were wearing, but when I read that part, I thought about the testimony of Sheree Hayes in the Sean Diddy Combs trial, the escort known as the Punisher. He testified that during a freak-off, Sean Combs allegedly wore a face covering that he likened to a Muslim hijab. In the lawsuit against Justin Combs, the alleged victim says that she knew that one of the men was Diddy just because of his mannerisms, but how about this? She also knew it was Diddy because she says that Justin, as his dad entered the home to allegedly rape a woman that he brought to LA, called Diddy, quote, Pops. Now, we see on Justin's social media that Pops is the phrase that he often uses for his dad. In this lawsuit, the alleged victim claims that she was led to a bedroom where she was allegedly told, quote, you better let this happen or else. Then she says that each man took a turn raping her, calling it a, quote, brutal gang rape. After that, she was taken to an airport on Monday and flown home. Not only is Diddy facing the possibility of spending the rest of his life in prison if convicted of all the charges in his sex trafficking and racketeering trial, there have been nearly 80 lawsuits filed against him in civil court. Many are still active. Several of the lawsuits accuse Diddy of sexual abuse and are filed by people who are not giving their names, just like in this lawsuit that we're talking about. This also isn't the first lawsuit that Justin Combs has recently faced. Justin was named in a suit brought by music producer Rodney Jones, who goes by Little Rod. Rod claims that Diddy coerced him into sexual acts, and you can see the suit also names Justin Combs and accused Justin of covering up a shooting in 2022 at Little Rod's.
Because people don't react to family the same way they react to headlines. They react emotionally, deeply, and sometimes irrationally. Because family isn't supposed to be part of the narrative. It's supposed to stay separate, protected, private. So when that line gets crossed, when something internal suddenly becomes public, that's when the entire conversation explodes. Now, this isn't just another controversy. This feels heavier, more uncomfortable. Because now people aren't just watching a situation unfold, They're watching what looks like a fracture. And fractures pull attention fast. Now, the narrative shifts completely. Because this isn't about outside voices anymore. This is about what people think is coming from within. And that perception, that's powerful. Even if it's not confirmed. Even if context is missing. Even if the reality is more complicated. That doesn't matter in the first wave. Because the first wave is driven by shock. Now, let's talk about the word that's driving everything. Reveal.
In LA with his dad. In May, a judge did dismiss Justin from Little Rod's lawsuit, so he is no longer facing those allegations. As for the lawsuit filed in the hours before his dad's attorneys were to make closing arguments, E! News reports that Diddy's attorneys have denied the allegations, but it's unclear what Justin's response is at the time of this recording. Joining us now is criminal defense attorney Will Corman. Always great to have you on Law and Crime. Thanks for being with us. What stands out to you in this lawsuit that Sean Combs is named, but also his son Justin?
Well, it's interesting. I think that the connection to Sean Combs is pretty tenuous. We've gone through this all. It almost seems the one connection to Sean Combs they actually put on him is the allegation that Justin called one of the masked men Pops during the course of the assault or just before the assault. That's it. The other connection, obviously, is that Sean Combs is Justin Combs' dad. So I think it's a bit of a stretch. Again, we're just receiving these documents now. We're just going through this lawsuit now. Perhaps there's more out there, but it really doesn't seem that way.
And of course, people who are victims of sexual violence, you want them to get their justice. We have seen dozens of lawsuits filed against Justin's dad in the wake of when he was indicted for the trial that he's on right now. How do you go through these lawsuits and understand who's telling the truth and who actually has a case that could be heard in court? Someone like Cassie Ventura, when you see that video from 2016, or you do look at some of these Jane Doe lawsuits and you wonder how many of them are true.
Look, as a criminal defense attorney, it's my job to be cynical, and it's my job to, review everything with a pretty jaundiced eye. So the question really becomes are there corroborating facts and circumstances from Jump Street that make sense? So, for example, if this lawsuit is alleging that something happened in LA during a specific period of time, do we know that Sean Combs was there? Do we actually know that he was present in LA? These things aren't difficult to find out, but it's those baby steps to trying to build the foundation of a lawsuit to see what's realistic that really matter in a case like this. And as you so correctly said, we want victims of domestic violence, of sexual violence, and so on and so forth to actually be compensated accordingly. Unfortunately, when we have circumstances where we have somebody famous who's been charged with crimes, we have somebody famous who's been sued, there can be instances where other folks jump on the bandwagon. And I'm not suggesting that's what's happening here, but it is something that everyone needs to look at skeptically.
Right, absolutely. If you were to bring a lawsuit against someone like Justin Combs, or any of these, and even the cases involving his dad, and you're bringing a civil suit, what facts do you need to have? I mean, certainly if you have a victim who says that this happened and they're ready to, they're able to provide some corroborating evidence that something happened, what do you actually need to be able to go to the courthouse and say, I'm filing a lawsuit against this person?
I think that you need to have somebody who's willing to state under oath that this is what happened to me, that this is what I'm alleging. These are my damages. This is how it's impacted me. And as an attorney, again, I would want to make sure, especially in a lawsuit like this, where it involves a high-profile person, but quite frankly, in any lawsuit, that there is some corroborating information out there so that my lawsuit isn't tossed out of court pretty quickly.
And reading through this complaint,
because that word carries weight, it suggests something hidden, something that's been held back. Something finally coming out. And the moment people believe something has been revealed, they assume it matters. They assume it changes everything, even if they don't fully understand it yet. Now stack that with family, because family adds emotion. It adds credibility in the eyes of the audience. It makes people think, if it's coming from there, it must be real. Even when that's not necessarily true. That assumption, that's what drives the reaction. Now here comes the split. One side locks in immediately. This confirms everything. This explains the past. This shows what was really going on the whole time. No hesitation. No pause. Just full belief. Then you've got the other side pushing back, saying there's no context, that situations inside families are complicated, that things.
Several other lawsuits. You have the lawsuit from Rodney Jones, who's known as Little Rod, and Sean Combs is facing that lawsuit, and his son was named in it, but has since been dropped. What do you make about it having all these other different cases and elements brought in? What is the attorney here trying to prove?
Well, it almost appears as if the attorney is saying, where there's smoke, there's fire. So here are all these other lawsuits, and I've reviewed the complaint, and they talk about them in some detail. They don't just list them. They say, this happened on this date, and this person sued Sean Combs here, and this person sued Sean Combs here for this set of facts and circumstances. And they're essentially trying to say, because there's all these other lawsuits, you should give this one a stamp of approval, because again, where there's smoke, there's fire.
Tony Busby, his law firm is bringing this. He has been in the civil world a very, very prominent name. For those who don't know him, and you work in criminal defense, what do you know about Tony Busby? Knowing that it's his law firm bringing this, what does that tell you?
I don't think that the Busby law firm is taking these allegations lightly. I believe they have the resources to do their own investigations prior to actually filing these suits. So this isn't some, sole practitioner who's trying to jump on the cottage industry that's been created around suing Sean Combs. I think that they have the ability to investigate this. They have the ability to decide whether or not they want to take on these cases. And I think that does lend some credibility, albeit not a ton, but I think it does lend some credibility to the facts and circumstances surrounding it. In other words, this alleged victim didn't just walk in off the street to some random law firm who then is saying, oh, we now have the ability to sue Sean Combs. This is someone who's been down this well-trod path before and probably knows exactly what the pitfalls are in suing somebody as prominent as Sean Combs.
This lawsuit came down at the time we're recording this, came down last night. So that was a couple hours after the government finished their closing arguments against Sean Combs. And as we're recording this right now, Sean Combs, his defense team is giving his closing argument. What do you make about the timing of this? It's against Justin Combs and Sean Combs' name, but it's happening right in the middle of maybe the most pivotal part of this entire trial.
I don't exactly know what to make of the timing of it. I think it's interesting. I think that I'm a little surprised that it's come out so late, but sometimes, we don't know what led the alleged victim in this lawsuit to break their silence and to file this lawsuit. Perhaps they were watching the testimony or reviewing the testimony in the criminal case and said, oh my gosh, that's exactly what happened to me. Perhaps they said, they listened to the testimony and they said, there are so many victims here. I believe that I am one too. We don't know what prompted it. I think the timing is interesting, but I don't know that I can make anything of it as we sit here right now.
I think of recently you had Tyler Perry, prominent name in Hollywood, very different case, but accused of sexual violence and sexual harassment, workplace harassment with an actor who had worked on one of his shows, and the actor provided text messages in the complaint. This doesn't have that. Very different case. But the fact that there's not that visual evidence that we can look at, and I don't know what type of visual evidence would exist in a case like this, but the fact that we don't particularly have those, does that take away from the weight of what this lawsuit may actually be in the end when it comes to the truth?
Well, I think we're getting ahead of ourselves a little bit here because
Sure.
The filing of a complaint is just simply the first step. And all the complaint needs.
Misunderstood, exaggerated, taken out of proportion. And they're right. But here's the reality. Nuance doesn't spread. Emotion does. And this is pure emotion. Now the situation gets amplified. Clips, quotes, fragments, all pulled out and shared across platforms. Because people aren't just watching anymore. They're reacting, breaking things down, trying to piece together a story from incomplete information. That's where narratives start multiplying. Because everyone sees something different. Now here's where things start to spiral. Because the longer there's no clear explanation, the more people start building their own. Not based on full facts, but based on interpretation, on repetition, on what others are saying. Because once something gets repeated enough, it starts to feel real, even if it's not fully accurate. Now you've got multiple versions of the same.
On paper anyway, is set forth the factual allegations that are enough to sort of not get the case thrown out at the first few stages. And that bar is pretty low. So there may be tons of evidence surrounding these allegations that aren't in the lawsuit. They don't need to be in the lawsuit. Again, there needs to be just enough to get us through those first few steps. Excuse me.
As Sean Combs, we're awaiting, once the jury gets the case next week, and then we'll see what the verdict is. But guilty or not guilty, he's going to be dealing with a lot of civil cases that are still pending. What does the timeline look like for Sean Combs? Let's just say he's found not guilty of everything. What does the legal timeline look for him? How long could he be dealing with the issues related to all these civil suits?
That's a great question. First of all, I don't think he's going to be found not guilty of everything. So that's a separate issue entirely.
Yeah.
Having said that, again, different jurisdictions have different statutes of limitations for sex assault victims to bring lawsuits within which, or timelines within which they can bring the lawsuits. And so again, depending on where allegations come from, those statutes of limitations can be very long. It also matters on how old the alleged victim was at the time that the incident took place. For example, there have been a number of states which have extended statutes of limitations for minors who were sexually assaulted. Those statutes of limitations are much longer than for adults who've been sexually assaulted. So it really does depend. And I know that's not quite answering the question, but I suppose the easiest answer is it could go on for quite some time.
And you look at this complaint. The complaint is for sexual assault and battery, gender violence, negligent supervision. I think a lot of people would look at this and they'd certainly, if all of this is true, what a horrific experience that this victim went through. Why is this not a criminal case?
That's a great question. And I suppose that this victim could have brought this to the county attorney's office or whatever local prosecutorial body there are. We don't know the answer to that. Perhaps quite frankly, we simply don't know the answer to that. But it's also important to remember this, that Sean Combs is named in this lawsuit. I have reviewed this lawsuit. The connection to Sean Combs is pretty thin from a legal standpoint. It just is. So we don't know why this wasn't brought forth criminally. Perhaps the person decided they would rather seek, their own form of justice from a civil standpoint. Sean Combs has a lot going on criminally right now, and perhaps it wouldn't even be prosecuted. Again, if he's found guilty of all these offenses in federal court in New York, Sean Combs is going to prison for decades. He's 55 years old. Not that old, but he's still going to prison for a very long time. So I don't know that the LA District Attorney's Office or whatever prosecutorial body is out there would bother pursuing criminal charges if Sean Combs at age 55 just gets a 30-year sentence federal.
And for Justin Combs, and I assume he'll have, I don't know if he has a trust or an inheritance or how he financially makes a living. Certainly it's part of being in the circle of Sean Combs. How does he pay for an attorney? Is that have to come from it? Because I think if Sean Combs is found guilty and all this money, and he's got a lot, but we don't know how much money Sean Combs has, frankly, but
We situations spreading at once. One version says everything is being exposed. Another says everything is being twisted. Another says this is just a small part of something much bigger. And all of those versions are moving simultaneously. That's what creates chaos. Because there's no single narrative, just multiple ones colliding in real time. Now think about what that does to perception. Because perception shapes everything. Once people believe something serious has come from inside, that belief sticks. Even if it gets challenged later. Even if new information changes everything. That first impression, it doesn't go away. That's the power of a moment like this. Now, let's talk about scale. Because this isn't contained. This is global. People everywhere reacting to the same situation, but interpreting it in completely different ways. Some see confirmation. Some see exaggeration. Some see something deeper that hasn't been revealed yet.
About a decision to revoke bail once it was granted, not ordering detention at the start of the case. The defense says the bar to have bail revoked is much lower. You don't need as much evidence to justify that. It's not clear and convincing. That's not the standard as we have with Combs' issue here. So that's a really interesting argument. And despite that, Combs' lawyers are saying in that case that the prosecutors are relying on, the government in that case, they had 3 days of hearings. They had 12 witnesses. They had all this proof to show that the defendant had engaged in witness tampering. Here, there was no hearing. There was no witnesses. They're basically making the argument that the court just took the government's word for it, that Combs was obstructing. And Combs' lawyers say the government has no actual evidence, just the allegations in the indictment. And they say that's a problem. You can't rely on the indictment. They say, quote, an indictment at most reflects a grand jury's finding of probable cause that the defendant committed a specific offense. It does not reflect any finding of clear and convincing evidence, which is the standard required to justify detention. And here it is unclear whether the grand jury ever even found probable cause to believe that Mr. Combs committed any witness tampering. There's no obstruction count. That's true. He's not charged directly with obstruction. What they're arguing is that, yes, the grand jury, they found probable cause of racketeering conspiracy, and yes, obstruction is one of the underlying listed acts of that charge, but there were a lot more that were listed. And the grand jury didn't necessarily find that obstruction was committed. They could have said, there's probable cause of racketeering because of sex trafficking, because of bribery, because of arson, because of kidnapping. Maybe not necessarily obstruction. They didn't say that. So these are all these other underlying acts that the grand jury could have relied on to say that this is a racketeering conspiracy. I think that's a good point. And then Combs' team doubles down that their bail package, it's sufficient. We've mentioned this before on Sidebar. Home confinement, 24/7 monitoring by a private security team, $50 million bail, no internet, no phone use, limited visitors. The visitor logs would be provided to the court. And this part's interesting because you see the government had previously argued that it's not fair to have a two-tier justice system where Combs would be permitted to stay free on sex trafficking and racketeering charges because he has the financial resources to turn his home into a private prison, whereas you have a defendant of lesser means who couldn't put forward that package, and therefore they would be denied bail, they would be locked up while waiting trial. That's not fair. Combs' team says, well, wait a second. We're offering this package and these conditions because Combs is wealthy. The government said he's a risk of flight. He's a danger because he has this money and resources. So the reason that this bail package looks like this, the reason it's so expensive, the reason he's essentially turning his home into a prison is because this would be the only way to ensure all of the concerns the government has. That's why it looks like this. The government, they say, can't have it both ways. It can't use Mr. Combs' wealth as both a detention sword and shield. Another good argument, in my opinion. And Combs' lawyers say when it comes to flight risk, the government can't prove it. Quote, Mr. Combs clearly intends to face and contest the charges, not flee. Nor do significant penalties and serious reputational harm demonstrate any risk of flight. The government has already destroyed Mr. Combs' reputation, and his only hope is to stand and fight, which he intends to do not only on this front, but also against dozens of civil law.
And all of that is happening at the same time. That's what keeps it trending. Now, momentum takes over. Because that's what's driving everything right now. Momentum built from shock, from emotion, from the constant need to understand something that feels bigger than it should be. And momentum like that, it feeds itself. It grows. It expands. Because it doesn't rely on facts. It relies on attention. And attention is locked in. Now, the situation isn't being controlled anymore. It's moving on its own. Driven by reactions. By speculation. By the constant expansion of narratives. That's where we are. A story that's no longer being guided. It's being constructed by the audience itself. Now, step back and look at the bigger picture. What you're really watching isn't just a controversy. It's a shift. A shift from public image to personal perception. A shift from external pressure to internal questions.
As for possible penalties, none could compare to the prospect of abandoning his 7 children, his mother, and other family members, as well as the remarkable career he has built for himself. So that's his argument for why bail should be granted and why he should be released pending trial. Now, having said all of that, you might have seen on a previous sidebar that we discussed this, how Combs has actually requested that the Second Circuit, again, the court he's making all these arguments in front of, that they don't do anything yet. They don't act on his appeal yet. It's called hold the appeal in abeyance. And that is because Combs says, wait. I don't want you to do anything. I want to first ask the new trial judge overseeing this case, Judge Arun Subramanian, if we can get bail. Let me go to him first. Let me try to convince him. If that doesn't work, then yeah, we'll come back to you guys. And I'll tell you what, based on the court docket, it appears the Second Circuit granted that motion. So now it looks like that bail issue is going to go in front of the new judge. Now, let me get to the heart of another big update in this case. You might recall, if you've been following this case, that back on October 10th, Combs had appeared in front of Judge Subramanian at a hearing. And at that hearing, a number of issues were discussed, including discovery. A potential trial date was set for May 5th, 2025. But there was something else that was discussed. A gag order. You see, Combs and his legal counsel, they have accused the government of engaging in misconduct. In a filing leading up to that hearing, Combs' defense counsel blamed the government, more accurately, the Department of Homeland Security, of leaking information and making inappropriate comments to the media. And they asked the court to schedule an evidentiary hearing to get to the bottom of what's going on here. More specifically, they allege that the Department of Homeland Security agents leaked that infamous 2016 videotape of Combs and Ventura that I mentioned before. And they say this leak happened after the raids on his properties in March, and this is before he was ultimately arrested in September. But they're saying Homeland Security leaked that information. And they also argue that Homeland Security agents were making statements to the media too that were inappropriate. So prosecutors responded to this by saying, first of all, our office had nothing to do with this. Okay, we had nothing to do with a leak of any information or making any of these comments. But number two, it's our understanding that the Department of Homeland Security, they didn't have the 2016 videotape prior to CNN publishing it. So Judge Subramanian reserved ruling at the time on whether to order an evidentiary hearing to sort all of this out. And by the way, potentially whether this 2016 tape, if it was leaked, whether it has to be suppressed, meaning it can't come into trial. That would be a huge win for Sean Combs. But Subramanian indicated he wants to review each side's arguments, which are due by November 7th, and then he'll see if a hearing is warranted. But what the judge did do is agree to a gag order. And this was something the defense had asked for as well. They want to stop the government from saying anything, from disclosing any material. The federal prosecutors at the hearing were like, okay, we'll agree to that, but the defense, they need to agree to a gag order too, because they say the defense hasn't been so clean in this. They called out Combs' attorney Mark Agnifilo for doing an interview with TMZ right after Combs was arrested, where he called the criminal case, quote, the takedown of a successful black man, essentially making this look like a racist prosecution. So Judge Subramanian said both sides have to work out a gag order. Okay, and that brings us to today's update. So in a letter to the court, Combs' defense counsel has addressed this gag order and what has been happening behind the scenes. So Combs' lawyers are saying, look, court, we have this proposed order. We think it's designed to prevent leaks. We think it's designed to prevent information from being made to the public and the media. And then it's
because once something like this happens, everything gets reevaluated. Past moments, old assumptions, things people ignored before. And the moment something shifts from public controversy into something that feels like it's coming from inside, that's when everything changes. Immediately. Because people expect drama. They expect headlines. They expect controversy. But they don't expect it to come from within. They don't expect it to feel like something private just got pulled into the open. And when that happens, that's when attention locks in. Hard. Now, the entire narrative shifts, because this isn't just about what's happening on the surface anymore. This feels deeper, more emotional, more complicated, because now it's not just about perception. It's about relationships. And relationships, they don't come with simple explanations. Now, let's talk about the word that's driving everything. Reveal. Because that word doesn't just something.
He should be allowed to post bail, calling him eminently trustworthy. Mark Agnifilo proposed a $50 million bond package using Combs's Miami home as collateral. Agnifilo noted that Combs has been trying to sell his jet since April of this year and has actually signed an agreement to do so. Combs also made a reservation to stay at a hotel in New York as he awaits trial, but the judge was not persuaded. He ordered that Sean Combs will remain detained until his trial on these charges. I want to take just a moment to tell you about Upside. It's a free app that will give you cash back on things like food and gas. This is not a confusing rewards program. Upside will give you actual money that you can transfer right into your bank account. Download Upside and claim an offer for whatever you're buying. You pay as usual using a debit or credit card. I've used Upside and gotten $9 back on gas and pizza. You can't beat that. You can use Upside at places like Shell, Exxon, 7-Eleven, and at restaurants like Chipotle, Dairy Queen, Domino's, and Taco Bell, just to name a few. So to find out how much you could earn, click the link in the description or download Upside using the QR code on your screen and use our promo code CrimeFix to get an extra 25 cents back on every gallon on your first tank of gas. That's promo code CrimeFix for an extra 25 cents back on your first gallon of gas. Justin Paperny is a prison consultant. He often advises people on how to handle going to prison. So Justin, first off, your thoughts on Sean Combs being scooped up on a Monday night at a hotel when he was expected to turn himself in on Tuesday.
Well, he's in real trouble. This case has gone on, or the conduct has gone on for a very long time, 2008, and continuing till today, according to the government. Clearly, they think he's at risk to the community, which is why they're going to ask that he remain in detention. And I know part of the reason they like to arrest defendants who very willingly would go and surrender and turn themselves in. They like headlines, they like attention, and they want people to know if you break the law, we're going to come and get you, regardless of the time, day, or how much privilege or wealth you might have. We're coming to get you. They like the show that accompanies arresting people, especially in high-profile cases.
Even if Sean Combs knew he was going to be walking into a courthouse on a Tuesday, it still has to be a little bit of a shock. He thought, I'm going to walk into that courthouse. I'm going to surrender. I'll make my initial appearance. I'll make bail. Maybe I'll get a GPS bracelet. But the U.S. attorney wants him to stay behind bars, and I'm assuming they will get what they're asking for. So this has to be a shock to somebody like Sean Combs, who is used to living in the lap of luxury.
It's a shock for anyone, whether you're rich or not, but certainly when you have that level of wealth and things have gone your way for so long, and you tend to have, when you're rich and famous, a lot of enablers around you who tell you what you want to hear, including potentially lawyers who are telling him what he may want to hear. They might have make it seem like it's a formality he's going to get bond. He may still get bond with very heavy restrictions and inability to leave New York, with an ankle bracelet, monitoring at all times in his mansion. Some people make fun of home confinement because you can be in a mansion. This is not like a white collar crime. When people get indicted in a white collar crime, the headline will say they're looking at 40, 50 years in prison. Then they get sentenced and it's 18 months or 2 years. They love the headlines. In this case, with racketeering and fraud and arson and everything that's been alleged, when they say 30 or 40 years, that's no joke. It could be 30 or 40 years in prison if convicted, and not in these cushy minimum security camps. He will be on a higher security prison labeled a sex offender, which presents a whole slew of problems. So his only goal right now is somehow, some way to remain free, because the risk of serving time in that detention center, being isolated because of his status.
Now, everything feels connected, even if it isn't. Now, the biggest question keeps coming up. What does this actually mean? Is it real? Is it complete? Is it being misunderstood? Or is it just a fragment of something much bigger? Right now, nobody has a clear answer. And that uncertainty, that's what keeps everything alive. Because as long as there's no clarity, every possibility stays open. And open possibilities, they keep people watching. They keep people talking. They keep the entire situation moving forward. That's where this stands. Not confirmed. Not settled. Just expanding. A narrative fueled by emotion, perception, and the powerful idea that something personal might have just become public. And until that idea is either confirmed or shut down, this doesn't end. It doesn't slow down. It stays right here at the center of attention, because whether people believe it, doubt it, or question every part of it, they're still engaged, still watching, still trying to figure out what's real. And that's what keeps it going. Not proof, not certainty. just the impact of a moment that feels too personal to ignore, and the possibility that what people think they know is only part of the story.